The moment Trevor Garrison's hand wrapped around Kamar Washington's collar and yanked her backward, the entire cafeteria went dead silent. 300 students, mid-bite, mid-laugh, mid-conversation, all frozen like someone had hit pause on reality. But Kamar didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. What happened next would change everything at Westfield High School forever. It started 3 weeks earlier, the day Kamar transferred in. She was the only black girl in her grade at this suburban school, and she knew exactly what that meant. She'd done this dance before: new school, new stairs, new whispers, new tests of whether she belonged. Her mother had warned her that morning as she dropped her off, "Baby, just keep your head down for a while. Let them get used to you." But Kamar Washington had never been good at keeping her head down. She walked into first period English wearing her favorite purple hoodie, natural hair in 2 puff balls, gold hoops catching the fluorescent lights. The teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, smiled warmly and introduced her to the class. "We have a new student joining us from Atlanta. Everyone, please welcome Kamar Washington." The response was exactly what she expected: some curious looks, some indifferent shrugs, and from the back corner, a snort of derision. That snort came from Trevor Garrison, 6 feet 2 inches of entitled attitude wrapped in a Letterman jacket. Star quarterback. Mayor's son. Unchecked. Unbothered. He sat sprawled in his chair like he owned the place, which, in many ways, he did. His great-grandfather had founded half the businesses in town. His family name was on the library, the park, even the football field. And Trevor made sure everyone knew it. "Look what we got here," Trevor muttered to his friend Mason, loud enough for half the class to hear. "Diversity hire for the school brochure." Mason snickered. Dylan, sitting behind them, joined in. Mrs. Rodriguez shot them a warning look but said nothing. Teachers rarely said anything to Trevor Garrison. Kamar took the only empty seat, 3 rows ahead of Trevor. She could feel his eyes on the back of her head, could sense the hostility radiating from that corner of the room. She'd felt it before, in other schools, other classrooms. The difference was, this time, she was tired of it. This time, she wasn't going to smile and pretend she didn't hear. This time, she was ready. The first real incident happened during chemistry lab. Kamar was paired with a quiet girl named Destiny, who seemed relieved to have a partner who actually wanted to do the work. They were measuring chemicals when Trevor and his crew walked by their station. Trevor's shoulder bumped Kamar's arm, hard. The beaker in her hand tipped, spilling acid across the lab manual. "Oops," Trevor said, not even trying to sound sincere. "Maybe you should go back to wherever you came from if you can't handle basic equipment." The teacher, Mr. Polson, was helping another group and didn't see what happened. But Destiny saw. Half the class saw. Nobody said anything. Kamar looked up at Trevor, her dark eyes steady. "You should watch where you're going. Might hurt yourself being that clumsy." Trevor's face reddened. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Kamar said, turning back to her experiment. "Or do you need me to speak slower?" The room got quiet. Nobody talked to Trevor Garrison like that. Nobody. Mason and Dylan exchanged looks, waiting for Trevor's response, but the bell rang, saving everyone from whatever was about to happen. Trevor leaned in close as students packed up. "You just made a big mistake, new girl." Kamar didn't flinch. "I don't make mistakes. I make choices." Over the next 2 weeks, Trevor's campaign began. It started small. Her locker was filled with crumpled paper. Her backpack disappeared during gym and was found in the boys' bathroom. Anonymous notes appeared on her desk with messages like, "Go back to the ghetto," and, "You don't belong here." But Kamar kept every single note, took pictures of every incident, documented everything in a small notebook she carried everywhere. Her mother noticed the tension at dinner one night. "How's the new school, baby?" Kamar pushed peas around her plate. It's fine, Mama. Her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts to afford their apartment in this better school district, wasn't fooled. Kamar Renee Washington, I didn't raise you to lie to me. What's happening? Kamar wanted to tell her everything. But she knew what would happen. Her mother would go to the school, make a fuss, and things would get worse. They always got worse when parents got involved. So she forced a smile. Just typical new kid stuff. I'm handling it. But handling it was getting harder. Trevor had followers, and they made sure Kamar felt their presence everywhere. In the hallways, they'd form walls she had to push through. In class, they'd whisper just loud enough for her to hear, their comments about her hair, her clothes, her skin. During lunch, no table seemed to have room when she approached with her tray. The breaking point was building, and everyone could feel it. Even teachers, who pretended not to notice the harassment, could sense the electricity in the air. When Kamar and Trevor were in the same room, it was like watching storm clouds gather, dark and heavy, waiting for lightning to strike. Destiny was the only student who showed Kamar any kindness. She was a small Vietnamese girl who knew what it felt like to be different in Westfield. During lunch one day, she warned Kamar in a low voice. Trevor's planning something. I heard Mason talking about teaching you a lesson. You should tell someone. Kamar appreciated the warning but shook her head. Let him try. I'm not running from Trevor Garrison or anyone else. Destiny looked worried. He's dangerous when he's angry. His dad owns half the town. The school won't do anything to him. Then I guess I'll have to do something myself, Kamar said, taking a bite of her sandwich like they were discussing the weather. What Destiny didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Kamar Washington wasn't just any transfer student from Atlanta. She was the daughter of Marcus Washington, a former Marine who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan before becoming a mixed martial arts instructor. Every morning before school, Kamar trained with her father. Every evening after homework, she practiced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and Krav Maga. She didn't advertise it. Didn't brag about it. It was just part of who she was, like breathing. Her father had taught her more than just fighting techniques. He'd taught her discipline, strategy, and most importantly, when to use her skills and when to walk away. Violence is always the last option, baby girl, he'd tell her during their training sessions. But when someone puts their hands on you, when walking away isn't possible, you end it. Quick and decisive. No playing around. No showing off. You neutralize the threat and get safe. The Monday of the 3rd week started like any other. Kamara walked into school wearing ripped jeans and a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, her hair in braids, this time twisted up in a bun. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers. But she kept walking, head high, shoulders back, the way her father taught her to carry herself. During morning break, she went to her locker to get her history textbook. When she opened it, a cascade of printed photos fell out. Pictures of lynchings from history textbooks, with her face photoshopped onto the victims. Her hands shook. Not with fear. But with rage. This was beyond harassment. This was a hate crime. She gathered every photo, every sick image, and walked straight to the principal's office. Dr. Coleman, a middle-aged white woman who always seemed overwhelmed, looked uncomfortable as Kamara spread the evidence across her desk. This is serious, Dr. Coleman said, her voice careful. Do you know who did this? Kamara met her eyes. We both know who's behind this. Are you going to do something about it, or do I need to handle this myself? Dr. Coleman shifted in her chair. Without concrete proof linking this to a specific student, our hands are tied. I can file a report, increase hall monitoring. Kamara stood up, gathering the photos. Save your reports. I've got all the documentation I need. Dr. Coleman called after her as she left. Miss Washington, please don't do anything rash. We have procedures. But Kamara was already gone. Her mind made up. The school wouldn't protect her. The system wouldn't help her. She'd have to protect herself. Lunchtime arrived with its usual chaos. The cafeteria was packed. Every table full. Voices echoing off the walls. Kamara got her tray and looked for somewhere to sit. As usual, tables mysteriously became full as she approached. She finally found a spot at the end of a half-empty table and sat down to eat in peace. She was halfway through her meal when Trevor appeared. He didn't come in alone. Mason and Dylan flanked him, with a few other football players hovering nearby. The cafeteria noise dimmed as students noticed Trevor approaching Kamara's table. Phone cameras started appearing, held low but recording. "Hey, new girl," Trevor said, his voice carrying across the room. "You're in my seat." Kamara didn't look up from her food. "Funny. I don't see your name on it." Trevor's jaw tightened. "Everything in this school has my name on it, including that seat. So move." Still, Kamara didn't look up. She took another bite of her sandwich, chewed slowly, swallowed. "No." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Students at nearby tables started backing away, sensing what was coming. Someone whispered, "She's crazy." Nobody says no to Trevor. Trevor's face went red. He stepped closer, looming over her. "I said, move. Now." Kamara finally looked up, meeting his eyes with a calm that seemed to infuriate him more. "And I said, no. Learn to accept it." That's when Trevor snapped. His hand shot out, grabbing the collar of her shirt, yanking her up from her seat. Her tray clattered to the floor. Food scattering everywhere. "Listen here," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You don't belong here. You never will. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." His grip tightened on her collar, lifting her slightly off her feet. The cafeteria was dead silent now. 300 students watching, waiting, some recording on their phones. This was the moment. The moment Kamara had been preparing for, not just for 3 weeks, but for years. Every morning training session. Every evening practice. Every lesson her father had drilled into her muscle memory. It all came down to this. Time seemed to slow down. Trevor's hand on her collar. His sneering face. The circle of his friends, ready to jump in if needed. She could see it all with perfect clarity. More importantly, she could see every opening, every vulnerability, every mistake Trevor was making. He was too close. Too emotional. Too off balance from leaning forward. His weight was on his front foot. His other hand down at his side. His friends, too far away to help immediately. Kamara's hand came up fast, faster than anyone expected. She grabbed Trevor's wrist, the one holding her collar, and twisted it sharply, clockwise. At the same time, she stepped to the side and brought her knee up, hard, into his stomach. Trevor's grip loosened as the air whooshed out of him. Before he could recover, Kamara continued the wrist lock, forcing him to bend forward, then swept his legs with her foot. Trevor Garrison, star quarterback, mayor's son, king of Westfield High, hit the cafeteria floor hard. The sound echoed through the silent room like thunder. But Kamara wasn't done. As Trevor tried to get up, she maintained control of his wrist, planted her foot on his chest, and applied just enough pressure to keep him down, without causing serious injury. "Stay down," she said, her voice calm and clear. "It's over." Trevor's face was purple with rage and humiliation. His friends started to move forward, but Kamara's eyes snapped to them. "Anyone else want to put their hands on me?" Mason and Dylan froze. The other football players looked uncertain. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Trevor was supposed to be untouchable. That's assault, Trevor gasped from the floor. You attacked me. Kamara smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. Everyone saw you grab me first. I defended myself. Big difference. She released his wrist and stepped back, hands at her sides, non-threatening. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the spell broke. Students started talking all at once, a roar of voices and excitement. Phones that had been recording were being checked. Videos already being shared. Someone started clapping. Then another. Then dozens of students were applauding. Not everyone. But enough. Enough to show that Trevor's reign of fear might be cracking. Security arrived within minutes, 2 officers who looked confused by the scene. Trevor was still on the floor, holding his wrist, while Kamara stood calmly nearby. What happened here? Officer Martinez asked, looking between them. She attacked me. Trevor shouted, finally getting to his feet. This psycho just attacked me for no reason. Before Kamara could respond, voices erupted from the crowd. That's not true. He grabbed her first. I saw it. I got it on video. Destiny pushed through the crowd, her phone held high. I recorded the whole thing. He assaulted her. She just defended herself. More phones appeared. More videos. All showing the same thing, Trevor grabbing Kamara, lifting her by her collar, threatening her, and then her swift, efficient response. Officer Martinez looked at the evidence. Then at Trevor. Looks like you've got some explaining to do, young man. But my father, Trevor started. Your father doesn't run this school, Dr. Coleman said, appearing with more security. She looked shaken, but determined. I've had enough, Mr. Garrison. You're coming with me. We're calling your parents and the police. This is assault, and there will be consequences. As security escorted Trevor away, still protesting, still threatening lawsuits and retribution, Kamara felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Mrs. Rodriguez, her English teacher. Are you okay? The teacher asked softly. Kamara nodded. I'm fine. Been better, actually. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled sadly. I'm sorry. I should have done something sooner. We all should have. The rest of the day was a blur. Kamara was called to the office to give her statement. Her mother was called and arrived within an hour, still in her scrubs from the hospital. When she heard what happened, she pulled Kamara into a fierce hug. I'm proud of you, baby. So proud. But also terrified. Are you sure you're okay? Videos of the incident spread beyond the school within hours. By evening, local news had picked up the story. Parents were calling the school, demanding answers about how harassment had been allowed to escalate to physical assault. The school board called an emergency meeting. Trevor's father, the mighty Richard Garrison, arrived at school in his Mercedes. But for once, his money and influence couldn't make the problem disappear. Too many witnesses. Too much evidence. Too much public attention. Trevor was suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. Criminal charges were being considered. But Kamara knew this was far from over. Trevor had friends, family, a whole system that had protected him for years. They wouldn't give up easily. The next morning, Kamara arrived at school to find the parking lot full of news vans. Someone had leaked the photos that had been put in her locker, and the story had exploded overnight. Racial harassment. Physical assault. Administrative negligence. It was all coming out. She kept her head down and hurried inside, not interested in being anyone's symbol or spokesperson. She just wanted to go to class in peace. But peace wasn't coming. Not yet. As she walked the hallways, the atmosphere was different. Some students nodded at her with respect. Others glared with resentment. The school was divided. And Kamara was at the center of it all. In her first period English class, someone had written hero on her desk. In second period math, someone else had written a racial slur on her calculator. The battle lines were being drawn. Destiny found her at lunch, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "You're famous. Everyone's talking about you. That video has like 1 million views already." Kamara pushed food around her tray, appetite gone. "I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to be left alone." "But that's the thing," Destiny said, her voice serious now. "They never leave us alone. My family's been here for 20 years, and people still ask where we're really from. At least you fought back. At least you showed them we won't just take it anymore." Before Kamara could respond, Mason appeared at their table. Both girls tensed, but his hands were up in a gesture of peace. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. What Trevor did, what we all did, it was wrong." Kamara studied his face, looking for deception. "Why now? Why apologize after I embarrassed your friend?" Mason shifted uncomfortably. "Because it took seeing him on that floor to realize, he's not my friend. Real friends don't make you do terrible things to other people. I should have said something weeks ago. I'm sorry I didn't." He walked away before either girl could respond, leaving them in stunned silence. The rest of the week brought more surprises. 3 other students came forward with stories of Trevor's bullying, emboldened by Kamara's stand. The investigation revealed a pattern of harassment going back years, always covered up, always excused. Dr. Coleman announced her resignation, admitting she had failed in her duty to protect all students equally. Trevor's father tried to spin the story, hiring a PR firm, threatening to sue the school and Kamara's family. But the videos were clear. The evidence overwhelming. His son had assaulted a student, and that student had defended herself. No amount of money could change those facts. Friday afternoon, Kamara was called to the main office. She expected another meeting about the incident, but instead found her father waiting for her. He'd driven up from Atlanta after taking time off work, his eyes full of pride and concern as he pulled her into a hug. "You did good, baby girl. Used your training, just like I taught you. Minimum force necessary. Controlled response. I'm proud of you." They sat in the conference room, and her father's expression grew serious. "But this changes things. That boy's family has power. Money. They're going to come after us any way they can. Are you prepared for that?" Kamara met his eyes, her mother's determination and her father's strength combined in her gaze. "I've been preparing my whole life, Dad. I'm not backing down now." The meeting that followed included the new interim principal, the school district's lawyer, and a representative from the NAACP, who had reached out to offer support. They discussed safety measures, legal protections, and the ongoing investigation. It was overwhelming. But Kamara felt something she hadn't expected: hope. People were finally listening. Finally taking action. As they left the school, Kamara's phone buzzed with messages. Students she'd never talked to were reaching out, sharing their own stories, thanking her for standing up. A group chat had formed, called Westfield United Against Bullying, with over 200 members already. Change was happening, slow and painful, but real. The weekend passed in a blur of interviews, meetings, and preparation. Kamara's story had gone national, sparking conversations about racism in schools, administrative accountability, and self-defense rights. She tried to stay focused on what mattered: her education, her family, her own well-being. The noise around her was just that, noise. Monday morning arrived with new challenges. Protesters stood outside the school, some supporting Kamara, others defending Trevor and claiming reverse racism. Police officers were stationed at the entrances. The media circus continued. But Kamara walked through it all with her head high, her parents on either side of her. Inside, the school felt different. Banners reading respect for all and zero tolerance for hate hung in the hallways. Teachers wore buttons supporting diversity and inclusion. It felt performative, like the administration was trying too hard to compensate for years of negligence. But at least they were trying. In English class, Mrs. Rodriguez had rearranged the seating. Kamara's desk was now in the middle of the room, surrounded by students who smiled when she entered. Trevor's corner sat empty. His friends, scattered to different seats. The power dynamic had shifted completely. "We're starting a new unit today," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, on Voices of Resistance in Literature. "We'll be reading works by authors who stood up against injustice, who refused to be silenced." She caught Kamara's eye and smiled. "I think we can all learn something from their examples." As the weeks passed, the immediate crisis faded, but the changes remained. Trevor was expelled and charged with assault. His family moved away, their reputation in tatters. Several administrators were replaced. New policies were implemented. Training on diversity and anti-bullying became mandatory for all staff and students. Kamara found herself, reluctantly, becoming a leader in the school's transformation. She joined the newly formed Diversity Committee, spoke at assemblies about standing up to bullying, and mentored younger students facing harassment. She hadn't asked for any of it, but she understood the responsibility that came with her actions. One afternoon, she sat with Destiny in their usual lunch spot, now joined by a diverse group of students who had formed an unlikely friendship circle. Mason was there, genuinely working to make amends for his past behavior. So was Ashley, a cheerleader who had quit the squad after they refused to support Kamara. There was Jerome, a black student who had been hiding his identity to fit in, until Kamara's courage inspired him to be himself. And Maria, a Latina girl who shared stories of her own experiences with discrimination. "You know what the funny thing is?" Kamara said, looking around at her friends. "I came here just wanting to be left alone, to get my education. Instead, I ended up starting a whole movement." Destiny laughed. "That's what happens when you refuse to be invisible. You give other people permission to be seen, too." The principal search committee eventually hired Dr. Angela Martinez, a woman of color with a strong background in equity and inclusion. Her first act was to meet with every student who had filed a complaint about bullying or discrimination in the past 5 years. "Real change," she announced at her first assembly, "requires us to face uncomfortable truths about our past and commit to doing better. It starts with listening to those who have been silenced." Kamara's story inspired other students across the district and beyond to speak up about their experiences. A coalition of parents, students, and community members formed to address systemic issues in the schools. Town halls were held. Policies were changed. It wasn't perfect, and there was still resistance from some quarters, but progress was being made. The Garrison family tried one last legal maneuver, filing a civil suit claiming excessive force and emotional damage. But when the case went to court, the judge watched the cafeteria video and threw it out immediately. "Self-defense is not excessive force," she stated firmly. And Mr. Garrison might consider himself fortunate that criminal charges were reduced to a misdemeanor. As the school year progressed, Kamara found herself thriving in ways she hadn't expected. Her grades were excellent. She made the debate team, where her quick thinking and calm under pressure served her well. And she even started teaching basic self-defense classes for other students after school. Her father came up to help with the training, proud to see his daughter passing on not just the physical techniques but the philosophy behind them. "Remember," Kamara told her students during one session, "the goal is never to hurt someone. It's to protect yourself and get to safety. The best fight is the one you avoid. But when someone puts their hands on you, when walking away isn't an option, you have the right to defend yourself. No one has the right to make you feel unsafe in your own skin." Spring arrived with unexpected recognition. Kamara was nominated for a Courage Award by a national youth organization. She was invited to speak at conferences about bullying and racial justice. Colleges reached out with scholarship offers, impressed by her grades and her character. The girl who had just wanted to be left alone had become a symbol of resistance and resilience. But with recognition came new challenges. Not everyone was happy about the changes at Westfield High. Some parents complained about reverse discrimination. Some students resented the new policies. There were whispers that Kamara had planned the whole thing for attention, that she had provoked Trevor deliberately. The hate mail started arriving, some of it truly vicious. Her parents worried about her safety. But Kamara had learned something important through it all: you couldn't control what other people did or said or thought, you could only control your own actions, your own responses. And she chose to respond with continued grace and strength. One evening, as she sat doing homework, her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, wary of harassment, but something made her pick up. The voice on the other end was familiar but unexpected. "Kamara, this is Trevor. Please don't hang up." She stayed silent, waiting. "I'm calling to apologize," he continued, his voice different from the arrogant tone she remembered. "I've been in therapy, anger management, the whole thing, and I realized I was wrong about everything. The way I treated you was inexcusable. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and I'm trying to be better." The call lasted only a few minutes. Kamara accepted his apology but made it clear that words alone didn't erase actions. Real change, she told him, took time and consistent effort. But she appreciated that he had reached out. It took courage to admit you were wrong, and she could respect that, even if she couldn't forget what had happened. As junior year ended, Kamara reflected on how much had changed since that day in the cafeteria. The school was far from perfect, but it was better. Students felt safer speaking up about injustice. Teachers were more aware and active in addressing problems. And she had found her voice, her place, her purpose. The girl who had walked into Westfield High just wanting to blend in had become someone who stood out for all the right reasons, not because she had flipped a bully in the cafeteria, but because she had stood up for her right to exist in peace, because she had refused to be diminished or erased, because she had shown others that they could stand up too. Senior year brought new responsibilities and opportunities. Kamara was elected to student council, not because she campaigned, but because her classmates wrote her in. She continued her advocacy work but also focused on her own goals: college applications, advanced placement classes, and yes, still those morning training sessions with her father when he could visit. The self-defense classes had grown into a full program, with proper funding and support from the school. Students of all backgrounds attended, learning not just physical techniques but confidence, awareness, and the importance of community support. Students were now teaching beginners, creating a legacy that would outlast her time at Westfield. One day, while teaching a class, a freshman girl approached her nervously. "I'm being bullied," she whispered. "They say things about my hijab, tell me to go back where I came from. I'm scared to come to school." Kamara knelt down to meet her eyes, remembering her own fear and anger from a year ago. "You belong here," she said firmly. "And we're going to make sure everyone knows it. Tell me everything." Working with the new administration, they addressed the situation swiftly and effectively. The bullies were disciplined, the girl received support, and another potential crisis was prevented. It was proof that the systems they had fought to change were working, that speaking up could make a difference. As graduation approached, Kamara received acceptance letters from several top universities, all offering significant scholarships. She chose Howard University, drawn to its history of activism and excellence. It felt right to continue her education at a place that understood the power of standing up and speaking out. The graduation ceremony was emotional for many reasons. As Kamara walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the applause was thunderous. She saw her parents in the crowd, tears of pride streaming down their faces. She saw Destiny and her other friends cheering wildly. She even saw some former enemies nodding with respect. But most importantly, she saw younger students watching her with hope in their eyes, knowing that they too could stand tall in spaces that tried to make them small. In her graduation speech as salutatorian, Kamara spoke about transformation. "When I arrived at Westfield High," she said, "I thought strength meant keeping quiet and avoiding trouble. I learned that real strength is standing up for yourself and others, even when your voice shakes. Real strength is refusing to let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in spaces you have every right to occupy." She continued, looking out at the sea of faces, "To those who supported me, thank you. To those who stood against me, thank you too. You taught me that justice isn't given freely, it must be demanded, defended, and sometimes fought for. But always remember, violence is the last resort. The first resort is courage, the courage to say no, the courage to document injustice, the courage to demand better from our institutions and ourselves." The applause that followed seemed to go on forever. As Kamara left the stage, diploma in hand, she felt the weight of the journey she had traveled, from the scared but defiant girl who had been grabbed by her collar in a cafeteria to the confident young woman heading to university, ready to continue fighting for justice in new arenas. That summer, before leaving for college, Kamara received an unexpected package. Inside was a book titled Courage in the Cafeteria, the Kamara Washington story, written by a journalist who had followed her case. The dedication read, "To all the students who refused to be silenced, and to Kamara Washington who showed us that one person standing up can inspire 1,000 others to rise." She smiled, thinking of that moment when Trevor's hand had grabbed her collar, when time had slowed down, and she had made a choice, not just to defend herself physically, but to defend her right to exist, to learn, to thrive. It had been the hardest and best decision of her life. As she packed for college, Kamara included her training gear, her notebooks full of documentation, and the lessons she had learned. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing she had the skills, the support, and most importantly, the unshakable belief that she belonged anywhere she chose to be. The girl who had shocked everyone in that cafeteria had become a young woman who continued to surprise, inspire, and lead, and this was just the beginning. Howard University, activism, law school, perhaps there were so many ways to continue the fight for justice and equality. Kamara Washington was ready for all of them. Looking back one last time at Westfield High as her family drove away, Kamara didn't see the place where she had been bullied and assaulted. She saw the place where she had found her power, where she had learned that sometimes shocking people was exactly what was needed to wake them up, where she had discovered that one person refusing to be pushed down could lift up countless others. The collar grab that had started everything seemed like a lifetime ago, but the strength she had shown in that moment, the decisive action that had shocked everyone, would stay with her forever. It was proof that no one had the right to put their hands on her, to tell her she didn't belong, to try to make her small. She was Kamara Washington, and she would never let anyone grab her collar again without facing the consequences. As they drove toward her future, Kamara smiled, knowing that somewhere in Westfield High, in schools across the country, other students were finding their courage, standing their ground, and shocking everyone who thought they could be pushed around. Her story had become their story, and their stories would create the change that was so desperately needed. The shock in that cafeteria had sent ripples far beyond what anyone could have imagined, and those ripples were still spreading, still inspiring, still changing the world, one brave stand at a time. The first few months at Howard University tested Kamara in ways she hadn't anticipated. Here, she wasn't the only black student fighting for recognition, she was surrounded by excellence, by students who had their own stories of resistance and triumph. It was both humbling and empowering. In her African American Studies class, when Professor Davis asked students to share experiences that shaped their activism, Kamara found herself hesitating for the first time in months. The girl next to her, Zara from Detroit, had organized walkouts at her school over inadequate heating in winter. The guy across from her, Marcus from Chicago, had started a nonprofit to combat food deserts in his neighborhood. Everyone had fought battles. Everyone had scars. Everyone had victories. When it was her turn, Kamar simply said she had stood up to a bully, leaving out the viral video and national attention. She wanted to be known for more than that one moment, even if it had defined so much of her recent life. Back at Westfield High, her absence was felt more than anyone had expected. The self-defense program continued under new student leadership, but enrollment dropped. The diversity committee still met, but with less urgency, less fire. It was as if the school was holding its breath, waiting for the next catalyst, the next person brave enough to shake things up. That person turned out to be Aaliyah Thompson, a sophomore who had watched Kamar stand up from the crowd that day in the cafeteria. Aaliyah was quiet, artistic, wore her natural hair in beautiful patterns her grandmother taught her, and had been dealing with microaggressions since middle school, teachers touching her hair without permission, students making jokes about her dark skin, the usual cruelties schools pretended didn't exist. The incident that sparked everything happened in October. Aaliyah was in art class, working on a self-portrait that celebrated her Sudanese heritage, when Brett Morrison, a junior who thought he was funny, started making clicking sounds and jokes about African tribes. The teacher, Miss Bramnam, was new, young, and afraid to rock the boat. She pretended not to hear, focusing intently on helping another student. Aaliyah remembered watching Kamar that day in the cafeteria, the calm before the storm, the decisive action, the refusal to be minimized. She put down her paintbrush and stood up. "Brett," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "you need to stop right now." Brett looked around for support from his friends. "Or what? You going to call your warrior princess?" he sneered. "Remember, nobody's here to save you." "That's where you're wrong," Aaliyah said, pulling out her phone. "I'm here to save myself, and I'm recording everything you just said." The class went silent. Miss Bramnam finally looked up, realizing she couldn't pretend anymore. Brett's face changed from amused to worried. "You can't record me without permission," he blustered. "Actually, I can," Aaliyah replied. "It's a one-party consent state, and you're harassing me in a public classroom. I know my rights." Kamar Washington made sure we all learned them. The video went to Dr. Martinez. Within an hour, Brett was suspended. But more importantly, Aaliyah's stand reminded everyone that Kamar's legacy wasn't just about one incident, it was about empowering others to stand up for themselves, to document injustice, to demand better. The spirit she had awakened was still alive at Westfield High. Meanwhile, at Howard, Kamar was discovering new dimensions to her activism. She joined the campus chapter of Black Lives Matter, participated in protests against police brutality, and began training with the university's martial arts club. But she also found joy in things that had nothing to do with fighting or resistance. She joined the poetry club, discovering a gift for spoken word. She dated a philosophy major named Jerome, who challenged her intellectually and made her laugh. She was becoming more than just the girl who flipped a bully. One evening in November, her phone rang with a familiar number. It was Destiny, her voice excited and nervous. "Kamar, you need to know what's happening here. Remember Brett Morrison? He's trying to sue Aaliyah for recording him without consent. His family hired Trevor's old lawyer. They're trying to make an example of her." Kamar felt the familiar fire ignite in her chest. Some people never learn. "Give me Aaliyah's number," she said, "and tell her not to worry. We've been through this before." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of phone calls, confidences, and legal consultations. Kamar connected Aaliyah with the same NAACP lawyer who had helped her case. She coached her through the emotional toll of being targeted, shared strategies for documentation and self-care. Most importantly, she reminded her that she wasn't alone. The network of support that had formed around Kamar's case was still there, still ready to activate. The lawsuit fell apart quickly once the lawyer reviewed the evidence. Brett's harassment was clear, the recording was legal, and the school's failure to intervene initially was another mark against them. But the real victory came when Aaliyah organized a school-wide assembly on cultural respect and appreciation. She brought in speakers from different backgrounds, showcased art and music from various cultures, and turned what could have been just another discipline issue into a learning opportunity. Kamar watched the live stream from her dorm room at Howard, pride swelling in her chest. This was what real change looked like, not just one person standing up once, but creating a culture where standing up became normal, expected, supported, where students knew their rights and weren't afraid to use them, where teachers couldn't hide behind ignorance or fear. As winter break approached, Kamar received an invitation that surprised her. Westfield High wanted her to be the keynote speaker at their MLK Day assembly. The request came from Dr. Martinez personally, who wrote, "Your impact here continues to ripple outward. Our students need to see what you've become, to understand that standing up to injustice is not just a moment but a lifetime commitment." Kamar accepted, though returning to Westfield filled her with mixed emotions. So much had happened in those hallways, both terrible and transformative. As she prepared her speech, she thought about what message she wanted to leave with current students. It couldn't just be about fighting back, it had to be about building forward. The day she returned to Westfield High, the parking lot was fuller than usual. Word had spread that Kamar Washington was coming back, and parents, community members, and students from other schools had come to hear her speak. As she walked through the front doors, she was struck by how small everything seemed. The hallways that had once felt like gauntlets now just looked like hallways. The cafeteria where everything had changed was just a room with tables and the smell of reheated pizza. But the faces that greeted her were different. Students she'd never met approached her with reverence, telling her how her story had inspired them. Teachers who had once been silent bystanders now wore buttons promoting inclusivity and had difficult conversations in their classrooms. The display case that once held only sports trophies now included photos from diversity events and quotes about justice and equality. In Dr. Martinez's office before the assembly, the principal showed her statistics that made Kamar's eyes water. Bullying reports were down 60%, not because less was happening but because students felt safe reporting it. The self-defense program had trained over 200 students. The Diversity Committee had successfully advocated for curriculum changes that included more voices of color in literature and history classes. Westfield High wasn't perfect, but it was transforming when Kamar walked onto the auditorium stage. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. She saw familiar faces in the crowd, like Destiny, beaming with pride, Mason, who had genuinely changed and was now co-leading anti-bullying workshops, and, surprisingly, Aaliyah Thompson, who had become the new face of student activism. But she also saw hundreds of faces she didn't recognize, students who knew her only as a legend, a story, a possibility. She began her speech not with the cafeteria incident, but with a quote from James Baldwin, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." She talked about the difference between individual acts of courage and systemic change, about how flipping a bully might make you famous for a minute, but flipping the script on bullying culture took sustained effort from everyone. "I didn't come to Westfield High intending to be an activist," she told them. "I came wanting to learn, to grow, to prepare for my future. But I learned that sometimes your future depends on your willingness to fight for your present, that safety isn't given but taken, that respect isn't granted but demanded, and most importantly, that one person standing up can inspire others. But real change happens when we stand together." She shared stories from Howard, from the protest movements she joined, and from the poetry that helped her process trauma and transform it into art. She talked about the burden and blessing of being seen as a symbol, and how she learned to balance fighting for others with caring for herself. She emphasized that activism wasn't just about confrontation, but about creation, building new systems while tearing down old ones. During the question period, a freshman raised her hand shakily. "What if we're not brave like you? What if we're scared?" Kamar's response would be quoted in the school newspaper and remembered for years. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's action in the presence of fear. I was terrified that day in the cafeteria. My hands were shaking even as I flipped Trevor. But I was more afraid of what would happen if I let him continue, if I let him think he had the right to put his hands on me. Start small. Document what you see. Support others who speak up. Bravery is a muscle that grows with use. After the assembly, Kamar stayed for hours talking with students, taking photos, signing copies of the book that had been written about her. But the most meaningful moment came when a young teacher approached her. Miss Kelly was maybe 25, fresh out of education school, and she had tears in her eyes. "I student taught here during your senior year," she said. "Watching you changed how I understood my role as an educator. I promised myself I would never be a bystander, never let harassment happen in my classroom. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like." As Kamar prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez walked her to her car. "You know," the principal said, "we've had inquiries from other schools, other districts asking how we transformed our culture. We tell them it started with one student refusing to be grabbed, refusing to be silenced, but it continued with hundreds of students finding their own ways to resist, their own voices to raise. You didn't just change a moment, Kamar, you changed a mindset." Driving away from Westfield High for the second time, Kamar felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. The girl who had entered that school just wanting to be left alone had become a catalyst for transformation. But more than that, she had shown others how to be catalysts themselves. The ripples from that moment in the cafeteria continued to spread, creating waves of change that would crash against shores she'd never see. Back at Howard, the spring semester brought new challenges and opportunities. Kamar declared a double major in criminal justice and African American studies, with plans for law school. She wanted to be the lawyer who stood beside the next generation of students fighting for their rights. She began internships with civil rights organizations, learning how to challenge systems through litigation and legislation, not just individual confrontation. But the universe wasn't done testing her yet. In March, a video went viral from a high school in Texas. A young Latina student had been cornered by 3 male students, threatened for speaking Spanish in the hallway. Unlike Kamar's situation, this girl had no martial arts training, she was simply terrified, crying, begging them to leave her alone. The video was heartbreaking, but what happened next shocked everyone. A black male student stepped between them, calmly but firmly telling the bullies to back off. When one swung at him, he used a move that looked remarkably familiar, a wrist lock and sweep that put the attacker on the ground without serious injury. In the interview that followed, the student, Deshaun Williams, said he learned the technique from videos of Kamar Washington. "She showed me that you don't have to accept being targeted, and you don't have to become the aggressor to defend yourself or others. I've watched her videos 100 times, studied how she stayed calm, how she used minimum force. She saved that girl because she first saved herself and showed us how." Kamar cried when she saw the video, understanding fully for the first time the true reach of her impact. It wasn't just about Westfield High anymore. Students across the country were learning from her example, adapting her methods, finding their own courage. The self-defense wasn't just physical but psychological, emotional, spiritual. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. That summer, she was invited to speak at a national education conference about school safety and anti-bullying initiatives. Standing before hundreds of educators, administrators, and policymakers, Kamar Washington was no longer just the girl from the cafeteria video. She was a voice for change, a bridge between student experiences and institutional responses. She challenged them to move beyond zero-tolerance policies that often punished victims along with aggressors, to create environments where standing up to bullying was supported, not suppressed. "We tell students to speak up, to tell an adult, to trust the system," she said, her voice strong and clear. "But then we fail them when they do. We ignore the whispers until they become shouts. We dismiss the small aggressions until they become assaults. We prioritize comfort over justice, quiet over equity, and then we wonder why students feel they have no choice but to fight back. The solution isn't to punish those who defend themselves. It's to create schools where defense isn't necessary. The speech received a standing ovation, but more importantly, it sparked policy discussions that would eventually lead to real changes in how schools addressed bullying and harassment. Kamar's story had become a case study, her methods a model, her message a movement. From one moment of refusing to be grabbed, an entire philosophy of resistance and resilience had emerged.